My name is Ron Gavlik, Media Coordinator for the Allegheny Greens. On behalf of our membership, welcome to the Green Party of Allegheny County. In our effort to minimize risk of coronavirus spread, the Allegheny Greens held our monthly General Assembly via Zoom on Tuesday evening, April 7th. Because of the online format, our Vice Chair, Garrett Wasserman, and our Chair, Jay Walker, were able to organize a presidential town hall Q&A with Howie Hawkins and Dario Hunter. I was fortunate enough to moderate. We begin with opening statements from the candidates, and then we move into a Q&A with participants. I hope you find the meeting informative. I also ask that you please like and share this video. Thank you.
Okay, well, hi, everybody. I hope you all are being safe and doing well. I'll tell you a little bit about me. I'm a retired Teamster. I came up in the San Francisco Bay Area, got involved in what we called the movement back then at a young age, civil rights, anti-war, ecology in the San Francisco Bay Area, and became committed at that time to an independent working class party committed to participatory democracy, democratic socialism, and ecology. Because the Democrats and Republicans, I realized this in 1964, were not supporting civil rights, really. And then Johnson won in a landslide and escalated in Vietnam. So my first party was the Peace and Freedom Party, which was in California and some other states and evolved into the People's Party. That was 72 and 76. And then the Citizens Party, where we ran Barry Commoner for president, the most prominent environmental scientist at the time. So I was involved in all that, along with social movements like I helped form the Clamshell Alliance. We occupied the Seabrook nuclear power plant site and sparked the whole anti-nuclear movement, the anti-apartheid movement for sanctions against South Africa. And then in 1984, I was invited to the first national organizing meeting for the Green Party in St. Paul, Minnesota. And they asked a couple of people from the Clamshell Alliance to come. I was one of them. And my message to that meeting was, we can't build a party out of a national presidential campaign. We're going to have to build this party from the bottom up. And that was the strategy adopted, and we started organizing local groups. So by the time Ralph Nader in 96 was willing to let us use his name as a presidential candidate, he didn't really campaign that year, we got on the ballot in over 30 states. So I think that approach worked. And I've been involved in the Green Party since that first meeting. The Greens in New York have run me 4 times in statewide campaigns against Hillary Clinton in US Senate 2006, and then 2010, 2014, and 2018 for New York governor, where we got enough votes to keep a ballot line or get a ballot line and keep it for the Green Party. So I've run national or large scale campaigns. So I'm running because a lot of Greens around the country asked me to. And as we talked about, how this campaign should go, we came up with 2 major goals. One is to put some life or death issues before the people of this country, before the media, and make them national issues. And the other was about party building. Those life or death issues are the climate crisis. So I've elaborated a whole eco-socialist Green New Deal. You can look on my website. We've come up with a budget. It's $42 trillion over 10 years. That's both a green economy reconstruction program and an economic bill of rights. And that would get us to 0 to negative greenhouse gas emissions and 100% clean energy by 2030. The Economic Bill of Rights deals with a second life or death issue, and that is inequality. Inequality is killing us. The working class's life expectancies have been declining. Our wages have been stagnant since the 70s. Cost of housing and healthcare and college and other things have gone up. And so we have a lot of white people dying what they call deaths of despair. We have rising suicide rates among African-American young people, and that can be attributed to that inequality. The Economic Bill of Rights would provide 6 basic economic human rights: the right to a living wage job for everybody willing and able to work, an income above poverty, affordable housing, comprehensive health care, lifelong public education from preschool through post-secondary, and a secure retirement. And then a third issue that none of the major party presidential candidates are talking about, is not being talked about, is this new nuclear arms race. We're gotten out of most of the treaties. The last bilateral treaty between the United States and Russia, the New START treaty, expires next February 5th, and there are no negotiations going on about that. That's why the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist has moved their doomsday clock to the closest it's ever been to midnight. So I'm calling for nuclear disarmament initiatives. The US should pledge no first use. It should unilaterally disarm to a minimum credible deterrent, and then mobilize the world to get the rest of the nuclear powers together to completely and mutually disarm, get rid of all the nuclear weapons. There was a treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons adopted, or the text was agreed to by 122 nations, none of them nuclear, 2 years ago. And the International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And nobody in this country hardly knows about that. So that's a top issue. I'm trying to make it a top issue in this campaign. And then, of course, every time I get asked by the media, particularly now that Bernie Sanders is failing or faltering, why am I spoiling the election? I say, no, the Democrats are spoiling the election because they've been whining about the Green Party since the Nader election in 2000. And we give them the answer to the spoiler question, and that is to abolish the Electoral College and have a ranked choice national popular vote for president. So that's another issue that the Greens have to be in this race that needs to be raised. It's an idea whose time has come. We're going to have it in Maine. The electoral votes there are going to be decided by a ranked choice vote. We need to go national. So that's the issues. The party building goals is we're putting a lot of resources from my campaign into getting on the ballot. That was paying petitioners. Now it's legal challenges and going to court when they don't give relief. Like I know Pennsylvania's asking for relief from the state, from the petition requirement, now that we're locked down with the coronavirus. And so that's a high priority for my campaign. We are making a serious and credible effort to get primary matching funds, which will match every individual's contribution up to a cumulative $250 when we qualify, and that'll go a long way toward these legal fees we're gonna have to pay. And then finally, we're just trying to build a campaign that's got the capacity to have a national impact. You know, there's no point in running if we can't change the agenda. And I think there's potential. With this coronavirus thing, Trump is an idiot, Biden is in hiding, and there's a vacuum there, and people are looking for answers. And I think the Greens can provide it, and I hope we can.
All right. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for having me yet again. Our campaign, as some of you may recall, kicked off in Pittsburgh. You know, it was particularly meaningful for me as someone whose personal political engagement began somewhat in Pittsburgh's backyard in Youngstown, Ohio. And for those of you who don't know me and are hearing about me for the first time, just a little bit of background. Now, I started life in a project in Newark, New Jersey, and was born to a very working, poor family. And for many years, I kept my head in a book to work my way out of the circumstances I saw around me. And that education, that ticket to a different, to a brighter future, is something that has very much informed my own personal activism and engagement. It has led up to my ultimate choice to be a member of the Youngstown, Ohio Board of Education, for which I served for a number of years, fighting against a pernicious state takeover to take away local control and choice and voice over education, and to substitute it with a profit motive form of education. And that fight is on behalf of people who really have been rendered voiceless by this looming democratic deficit that exists in our country. Very much the center of a number of issues that we as a party are fighting against. I've been an educator myself. I've been an educational administrator. I've been an environmental attorney, most recently a rabbi, and I've been an anti-fracking activist in the Mahoning Valley area in Ohio. And those are all things that I've been very proud to be engaged in. This grassroots kind of fight, this grassroots kind of activism is something that really motivates me, and it speaks well to the party's past, present, and future. So because that activism, that on-the-ground activism is where a lot of my engagement's been centered, I've learned from my political involvement with the system that there's so many people who are unheard and so many voices that need to be brought to the forefront. How do we do that? In 2020, this is going to be especially a challenge. And I see this as not only a challenge, but an opportunity, because the people who are left behind by the two corporatist parties are hungry for something different, and we can offer it to them like no one else can. And so that's why our campaign is focused not just on the core areas of our green platform, which probably all candidates would agree on: education for all, including college being completely free, Medicare for all, housing guarantees, a living wage, and of course, the Green New Deal. Our campaign is focused also on those additional, above and beyond ways in which people feel left behind by this system. And so we are advancing, for instance, a step beyond the Green New Deal, something we call the Green Path Forward. We understand that on a global scale, this country's imperialism and colonialism has caused havoc internationally and has created even more voiceless people across the globe. And so instead of engaging in war, we are aiming to replace the military-industrial complex with a Department of Peace that will actively be engaged in peace building and in diplomacy, shoulder to shoulder as equals with nations across the world, in a way that will allow us to build a global climate change agenda together, because it is a truly global problem. We're also focused on the many facets of the environmental crises we all face, including plastic pollution and its contribution to climate change, big ag and its contribution. Of course, science tells us that we need to reach peak meat and reduce meat consumption and production in order to solve this climate change problem. And our campaign is focusing uniquely on that. We're also focusing on nitrogen and phosphorus pollution. So we are taking a comprehensive approach to this. When I talk about the different segments of society that are left behind, this is something that's very personal for me. As an African American, as a son of an immigrant, as an openly gay man, there are many minorities, there are many people who have been marginalized in this country by this corporatist system. And so our campaign advances what we call the People of Color Bill of Rights, a recognition in our policy that despite the law, the rights that are said to be on the books for everyone equally, that there's a genuine disparity in actual practice. And so we focus on, for instance, the disparities in the justice system, police brutality, rampant police brutality and murders on the streets of this country. We focus on increasing opportunities for genuine representation in the public defender system, fixing the broken public defender system. We focus on the gaps in terms of the banking and finance system, including the persistence of redlining in urban areas all across this city, which has drawn racially sculpted neighborhoods. We focus on environmental and educational racism, the ways in which pollution is targeting minority communities, and the ways in which educationally children of color are being targeted for profit and funneled through the prison, the school to prison pipeline, through the new mass incarceration system, the new plantation system that is mass incarceration. So we focus on the multiple facets of the experience of many people who feel they've been left behind by this system. Now, I mentioned the Department of Peace. We are a strong voice against war, not just for nuclear disarmament, but for ending, period, this country's military-industrial complex. We are not just going to slash the budget. We're going to replace it with a peace-building enterprise. And I think that speaks very strongly to this party's peace-oriented agenda. We need to become a more positive voice internationally, a more positive presence on the international scene. And our party can be that voice domestically that can spur on that great change. Now, it has been mentioned, this great crisis that we face together, COVID-19, a crisis that I know we can all overcome. This particular crisis is in many ways not just natural, it is man-made. We are suffering from a viral infection of injustice in this country. And what we're experiencing right now has laid bare the many ways in which that is the case. We should have had Medicare for all by now. We should have had governmental supply for medical supplies, for pharmaceuticals, instead of the price gouging and the nefarious opioid crisis whipped up by big pharma. We should have had those things. And the Green Party should be the voice fighting for those things. Our campaign strongly believes that, and that's why we have a robust platform for dealing with this crisis, but also dealing with the inequalities beyond this crisis. We're advancing a platform to deal with COVID-19 that involves ensuring at least $2,000 a month to each person in this country in relief. We're advancing a platform that includes no rent, no mortgage, no evictions for the duration of this crisis. No one should have to suffer through this crisis and then be saddled with debt as soon as it is over. We're advancing a platform that ensures housing for the unhoused, including using the many governmental options available that the governments refuse to make available to people. Here in California, where I am, people are taking over houses owned by Caltrans, a governmental agency that they have refused to allow the unhoused to use. The government should be assisting in finding housing, not fighting the unhoused. And of course, we believe that we're not going to solve a crisis like this or the inequalities as a whole in this country unless we deal with the gap in terms of food availability. There are massive food deserts in this country. The south side of Youngstown, where I served in public office, is one of those food deserts where you cannot find healthy food. How do you expect people to overcome this health crisis when they do not have access to healthy food? Our platform addresses those gaps, the gaps also in medical services and clinics and hospitals in urban as well as rural areas across this country. And of course, as a part of our foreign policy as a whole, we need to end those sanctions that are putting a stranglehold on peoples across this globe. Iran, for instance, it's shameful what this country is doing in regards to Iran. We all fall and rise together as humanity. And so we have to ensure the health of all of humanity. This crisis has underlined how fragile humanity is, but also underlined how much we need each other and need to build a strong and lasting peace together. And that is the emphasis of our campaign, recognizing everyone, making sure that no one is left behind, giving a voice to the voiceless, building peace, and tackling inequality for all.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I would like to ask the panel of participants if they have any questions to raise their hands, and we will unmute you.
How do you see him?
I know that Jay has a question. Perhaps Jay stepped away.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm here. My question is, what do we need to do to build the Green Party, and how would you, being at the top of the ticket, help us at the state and local level? And it's to both candidates.
Yes, Howie, if you'd like to go first.
Okay, well, one thing we got to do is have a national presence. We got to be on enough states, hopefully all 50 states in the District of Columbia, so that we get paid attention to. That's one factor. Getting the matching funds and having enough staff to support a credible campaign is another factor. And getting earned media on the basis of that is a way we get into the national debate and get our issues put forward. But then the follow through to that has got to be at the grassroots level. And one of the things my campaigns are trying to emphasize is that, most Greens are pissed off former Democrats. They opposed the war in Iraq and found out the Democrats were for it. Or they got affordable housing issues in their city and they find out the Democrats are a machine run by the real estate money. Or there's police brutality and the Democrats are afraid of the police, politically at least, and sometimes physically. So they won't be an ally. And so, Greens come out of movements, they try to work on issues. They have been Democrats. They come as activists. And activists show up, Greens show up. We show up at the public hearing, we show up at the demonstration. And our idea of trying to build the base broader, where it needs to be built among the working class and youth and people of color, is to go where those people are and give them a leaflet and say, join us. And I think what we need to learn how to do is organize. What a union organizer, what a community organizer knows is that you don't go preach, you go listen. And you find out what's going on and how you can help. And you build relationships and trust. And then you can talk about the politics. So we've been urging that with our, working with local groups. I also think that the top of the ticket can be a cheerleader and coattails for local candidates. And we really need to support our local candidates. Here in New York, the damn Democratic Party, I mean, you've probably seen Cuomo out there looking pretty good compared to Trump on these coronavirus briefings. But while he was doing that, he passed a austerity budget in New York. And I call him the austerity autocrat because he cut Medicaid under the cover of the coronavirus crisis. And he has a history of cutting hospitals. We've lost 41 hospitals in New York and 20,000 beds, most of them under Cuomo's tenure. So he set us up for the problem we're having now. And also, he just got laws changed in ballot access. So it's now 3 times harder to get on and keep your ballot, 3 times more votes. And if you get knocked off, 45,000 signatures instead of 15,000 signatures in a 6-week window. And that's the damn Democratic Party. So we've got to fight for our candidates' right to be on the ballot. And then we have candidates who, before this lockdown started, submitted their primary petitions. 2 Green congressional candidates. Now the Democratic National Committee, Coase Perkins, this big Democratic law firm, has gone to court saying we challenge their signatures, but the BOE, the Board of Elections, shouldn't review them because it's unsafe in the coronavirus crisis. Therefore, knock those Greens off the ballot. So we got a fight on our hand. I think, you know, the one thing that the national campaign do is fight for our candidates down ballot.
All right, so I thank you for that question. And it's a very important question, especially going into this particularly challenging race in 2020. You know, someone who is a local party leader in the Mahoning Valley in Ohio, was the chair of the Mahoning Valley Green Party, and as someone who has run for office successfully and sometimes not successfully, so goes the story for a number of Green candidates. I know the challenges involved in bringing people out to the polls and getting people out to the table to be a part of organizational meetings. And my observations are as follows. In my organizational work, one of the things that I've seen as a challenge in local organizing is increasing the base, the diversity of the people involved, and getting out of comfort zones and making those interpersonal connections. You often find that the people you're engaged with in local groups are some of the people who've been doing it for 20 years, 30 years, mainly the same people. Their contributions are wonderful. They're very much appreciated, but there's always a search for who they're going to pass the baton to next. And in some cases, the group becomes over time a little homogeneous. In the city of Youngstown, Ohio, which is a one-party town, it's a Democrat-controlled town, they have bases of support that they use to reinforce that control. You go to your local church and the pastor is connected to the local Democratic Party. People are used to receiving their political messaging in the same packaging, the same way from the same people. And if you aren't going where people are, then that message isn't reaching them. You can give them a leaflet. You can send them a card in the mail. Studies show that people look at that for no more than 7 seconds. But what does engage and attract people is if you connect with them where they are on the issues that matter to them. And so the Green Party has to not only go to the places where people are outside of our comfort zone, churches, community organizations, but also ally with causes that speak to the values that we support. If there's an effort to increase democratic choice and voice, whether or not is an exclusively Green effort, we want to get involved and engaged in that. And in my local area, we have done that. And that adds to the visibility as well as the sense of the usefulness of the party. You also want to support local candidacies. And I found that in my time as a member of the Youngstown, Ohio Board of Education, it gave people an opportunity to see what green leadership meant, what kind of values it represents. And once people see that, then they feel a sense of the viability of having that additional democratic option. Now, you can talk about ballot access, and ballot access is extremely important. We want to stress that, and we want to get the groundwork done to make that happen, from petitioning to whatever issues organizationally are involved to reach people and make that happen, even under the challenges of COVID-19. But I can tell you, in Ohio, for example, we had ballot access. And ballot access alone doesn't make people necessarily see you as a viable option to actually vote for. How that will happen is when you get on the ground level, grassroots, and change things together with all of the people who are involved in increasing democratic choice and voice. in increasing the opportunities for all citizens, in increasing the ability for the voiceless to be heard. When people see you doing that in motion, then they see you as a viable option. And I found that to always be true and always be the case in my local organizing efforts.
Okay, thank you very much. I see our next question is from Paul Dortle. Paul, if you could state your question briefly and clearly so everybody can hear.
Dario and Howie for being with us today. I appreciate that very much. And my question is, though you may not have the ability to say who your running mates may be, my question is, what are you looking for in a running mate, and how do you see that as a potential for expanding the Green Party's influence?
Howie, do you want to start again?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm looking for a younger woman of color, and I'm talking to a few, and it's too early to be presumptuous to say one of them's going to be my running mate. I think at this point, because the convention hasn't happened. Also, I think likely by the time we get to the convention, we'll probably know who the nominee is going to be based on the primaries. So the vice presidential candidate will be a news hook. So that's basically what I'm thinking in that regard.
Okay, thank you, Dario.
All right. So I thank you very much for this question, because I think as a party, what we're about is about teamwork, about team building. And so the kind of team you're going to put forward is going to be a very valuable part of the discussion of how we're going to attract people in 2020. And so definitely for a teammate in this campaign, I'm looking for someone who's going to be different from me, who's going to have a perspective that's different from me in a way that complements the fight we're commonly engaged in. And I say fight because we are fighting against a lot of deeply entrenched forces. The money of the corporatist parties, the war machine that wants to keep feeding itself with continual profit. We're fighting against the effort to shut people out. And that fight is going to take someone who's got a very strong will, a person who is meant to be a fighter, an activist, a natural activist. It's going to take someone who's been long engaged in that fight. And I'll be looking for someone who has been agreeing for quite some time, engaged in that fight. And I'm glad to say that I've already found that person. And I did already announce my running mate some time ago. That person is Darlene Elias, and she is on this call. I'm very proud to call her my partner in this effort. It is a 2-for-1 package that you're getting. She has been deeply engaged in a lot of important causes, including causes such as housing and women's rights. She has been an activist in the Green Party for a number of years, a former co-chair of the party, former co-chair of the Women's Caucus, engaged with the Latinx Caucus, and represents a lot of the perspectives that I don't personally have, bringing that wealth of difference, of diversity to this ticket. And I feel that it's a combination that speaks to the wider American experience. And that's what we want going into 2020. People are looking for something different. They're looking for voices to come to the forefront that truly represent them in a different way. And that's what we're bringing to the table. And I want to address the idea of it being too early. It's never too early for us because we don't have the resources the Democrats and Republicans have. We need to be ready long before they've even thought about coming for us. And that's why I made sure to make this pick early, because I wanted to make sure that our candidate's going to have more experience than any other vice presidential pick. And that's a fact. She will, because we have picked before any other candidacy in this race. We will already have gelled as a team, and we'll be marching strong into 2020. Now, I don't know if the format allows. I would love for Darlene to speak for herself, but if that's not possible, I just want to close with saying that when you vote for our ticket, Hunter Elias, you are getting that already prepared and ready package into 2020. And that's an important strategic part of how we are going to ensure success in this coming race.
I'd like to interrupt this conversation for 1 second to let everybody know that Darlene is on the call, and we will give her a moment to address us toward the end. Our next question is from Mark Brown. Mark, if you could unmute your own microphone. I'm going to unmute you actually. ask your question briefly and clearly, and then we'll meet you up again.
All right. Yeah. Thanks. So my question is both candidates. As we heard earlier, I talked about COVID-19 and what has been happening in our country. So I have a two-pronged question based on science. So my background is that in 2009, I graduated with a bachelor's degree from the University of Pittsburgh. Since then, I haven't been able to advance my degree. I'd come from a lower middle class background when the middle class still existed. And there was no real resources for me to find my way forward in science. I spent years in different labs, and sequestration rolled out in 2012 by Obama, and it actually cut funding for science. And I lost my position in my first lab due to funding, and my second lab due to funding. And all the while I was trying to struggle to make ends meet. I had student loan debt that was out of control. I actually had to declare bankruptcy for 5 years, the 5-year bankruptcy, to get my payments under control because banks wouldn't cooperate with me through payments. They lied to me, told me I had to pay $800 and wouldn't work with me. I'm finally now in the Graduate School of Public Health and earning my degree in microbiology and infectious diseases. My question being, part one at least, is how would you encourage people to go into science and sort of expand it in America? Because as we're seeing right now, people are burning 5G towers because they think 5G is creating coronavirus. And my part two question is also very important, as it's very timely. Right now, what we're seeing is Trump blocking Dr. Fauci, or blocking people that know the science, that are in public health. That the response right now, we're in the crisis we are now because our politicians led us astray and didn't act quickly enough. And now we have this pandemic, and we're at the point now where the tests no longer able to keep up with the amount of people sick. So it looks like our curve is dropping, yet our death rate's increasing and the infections seem to be spreading. So to break down, sorry, I know it's a long question. How would you encourage scientists for the next generation so they won't have to wait 10 years to advance their degree? And like I said, struggle myself. If I would have went straight through graduate school, I'd probably have my own lab working on COVID-19 right now. But instead, I'm struggling to get through graduate school. And part two is, how would you deal with politicians or people that are suppressing the truth and won't let the actual public health people get involved before we're in a crisis where we have to self-isolate?
Okay, Howie?
Well, to get more people into science, a lot more people want to go than have the opportunity. And you mentioned the sequestration and the cut in funding. So I think that's the first thing we can do. Encouragement is good, but I think there are plenty of young people that would like to do it. They never get the opportunity. I mean, I went to a vocational high school. We didn't have a physics class. We didn't have a chemistry class. You could take shop, you could take auto mechanics, you could take a narrow college prep course, which I was able to get into college through. But if I want to take science, I had to get on a bus, go to a community college, and basically take the whole afternoon, so I couldn't play sports. And, you know, very few kids did that or were ready to do that. And we shouldn't be rationing things like doctors and engineers and scientists. And we've got this visa program where these tech companies are firing the scientists and engineers we have trained and bringing in immigrants at low wages on contracts where they can't really organize to get the same pay that was being got before. So I think those are things we can do to encourage more young people to get into science. Now, as far as the politicians getting in the way of public health and science, look, Trump is guilty of negligent homicide. He has misled people. It took him 70 days to even acknowledge there was a problem. He had intelligence reports. He had public health reports. Apparently his trade advisor, Navarro, just gave a dire report way back too. And he ignored that. Trump is all about Trump. And then who's his opponent? Where the hell has Biden been? And then when he does come out with a program, 14 days paid leave, I mean, he has no clue what people are going through right now. So, that's where the Green Party's got to step up. And, we should be demanding right now. One thing Bernie said was good was Medicare should pay for treatment. The government's paying for testing, but if you get treatment, the average cost is $35,000, gets as high as $75,000, $80,000. And people can't afford that, and they won't get treatment. There's a kid that died out there in Lancaster, California. He didn't have insurance. He went to a hospital. They turned him away. And he was trying to get somewhere else. He died on the way from heart failure. I mean, I don't know how many cases like that there are, but that just shows how insane and immoral our system is, where healthcare is a buy or die commodity, not something you have as a human right. If we could get Trump out of the way and find, old General Honore or somebody from the military and some people in industry that know logistics, there should be a national plan under the Defense Production Act to produce and then distribute the medical supplies we need. The tests, the PPE, the ventilators, the hospital beds. And that's not happening. It's states, and you probably heard, they're bidding against each other and people are price gouging, selling what scarce supplies we have. That's criminal. We need to have a program. So if we're ever going to get back out in this economy safely, we're going to have to test and contract trace those who are positive to those who've been in contact, and then quarantine the people who have had contact or are infected from the rest of us. And until we do that, it's not going to be safe to go back out there. We need a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. Now, I don't agree we want a moratorium on payment of rent, mortgage, and utilities. You do that, you're going to start a domino effect of bankruptcies, going right back to the banks. There are 10 or 11 million mom and pop landlords. Maybe they live in a duplex and they're renting out an apartment, or they got another house in the neighborhood. And, if they don't get the rent, they can't pay the mortgage, and pretty soon you're going to have evictions and foreclosures. And, even if we got the foreclosure moratorium and the eviction moratorium, what the government should do is have a forbearance program where you scale it according to people's ability to pay, and the government pays the difference on those rent and mortgage and utility payments, so that the businesses we got can stay in business. So those are immediate things we need to do. And of course, longer term, Medicare for all. And I'm calling for a national health service, not just national health insurance, but publicly owned hospitals and clinics, doctors, nurses, and other healthcare providers and workers being salaried public servants, and the whole system controlled democratically by a federation of locally elected health boards. That's the old Ron Dellums bill that came out in the 70s, a national health service. The Eco-Socialist Green New Deal, that's massive investments, rebuilding our whole industry, retrofitting our buildings, energy production, agriculture, all the sectors of the economy. That's a huge job. And when we get back into to work, we can provide full employment doing those things. And also the economic stimulus, the investments that will create jobs, because we may come out of this, and we already had excess capacity, overproduction, classic problems of capitalism that Trump was making worse with his tax cuts for the rich, which is now distributing the money. The rich are investing in financial investments instead of productive investments. We were headed for a recession anyway. We get out of the coronavirus lockdown, and those recession conditions will exist. So we need that kind of investment. And then another thing, just going back to the COVID, is that Trump shut down funding for pandemic preparation in the National Security Council and public health programs at the Center for Disease Control. So those got to be brought back up to scale, and probably a greater scale than they were when he came into office, so that we can deal with the next issue like this in a proper way.
Thank you, Howie. Dario?
All right, briefly before I get to the heart of the questions that you've asked, I just want to address this issue of assisting citizens who are suffering in the middle of this crisis. You know, this government has waged war on many parts of this world, protracted wars for profit, and spent a great deal of money doing that. It's also bailed out big business on a number of occasions. We can afford, and we actually can't afford to not. We can afford assisting Americans in this time of struggle. And if we don't, the results will be economically catastrophic if we let people languish with built up unpaid rent and payments that they'll have to pay as soon as this crisis is over. The economic result will be catastrophic for the people who matter most, everyday Americans, not the banks. That's who matters. Now, when we talk about science, ensuring that we encourage enough people to get involved in science and in medical fields, as someone who's been an educator, as someone who has served in public office on the issue of education, the first thing that occurs to me is that we are not prepared educationally to increase the number of people involved in the science fields. Our scores are abysmal in regards to science, in regards to math, particularly in inner city districts like Youngstown, Ohio. And so we need to ensure we have a more robust educational system and we have equal opportunity to be able to pursue whichever field you want to go into, be it science or anything in the liberal arts. We need to have a more robust educational system, and we need to have a system that's more responsive to the needs of citizens. So that's the building block behind that. And investing more in education includes a free education, including college, for all Americans. One of the things that holds people back from getting in a field, such as science or in the medical field, is the massive amount of funding you need to make it happen. Getting any professional degree takes a great deal of money. Look, as someone who's a lawyer, I can tell you that firsthand. Once we remove the possibility that people's entire future will be lock, stock, and barrel owned by the banks if they go into certain fields, then we'll increase the ability of people to do so, to have that upward mobility into scientific and in medical fields. I think we need to incentivize it as well. We have incentivization programs already for public service. And I think that we need to consider engagement in the scientific fields and in medical fields, public service in that regard. So when it comes to the second part of your question about how we deal with a circumstance where we're in a pandemic like this, and the commander-in-chief, so to speak, this title that they use to give us the sense of engagement with this military-industrial complex, our president is defying all known scientific sense and the people who were hired in order to have a controlled and organized response to this pandemic. I would say the root of that, first and foremost, is the fact that we have a massive democratic deficit and this person got into office in the first place. It's tragic that that ever happened, but it happened because we have this system that has bamboozled and convinced the people that they have to choose between the lesser of two evils, and so the more evil gets even more evil and the lesser evil gets even more evil. We need to increase our engagement democratically in this country through proportional representation, through ranked choice voting, so that people can see additional choices, feel that there are viable additional choices. And that is a way in which you hold politicians accountable to try and ensure we don't get someone like Donald Trump in office in the first place. We want to, of course, increase funding for public agencies. We want to ensure that there are legal safeguards so that necessary public agencies and efforts for the public health aren't simply shut down from administration to administration and we are left short when we're in a pandemic like this. The Trump administration has already acknowledged, basically removed certain safety net organizational structures that we needed for a pandemic like this. And that shouldn't be possible. And there are legal ways, there are ways to ensure that it isn't. So it's an organizational issue in part.
I'm not sure what happened there. I don't know if Dario is paused for everybody.
Can you hear me and see me?
Okay, you're back.
All right. It's probably just the net connection. It's raining here. Sometimes it gets unstable when that happens. We have to ensure that we have protections in place so that we have a robust media to hold politicians like Trump accountable. And right now, we don't. We have a system in which freedom of the press is greatly endangered. And the Assange case underlines that sharply. So we need to have protections in place for whistleblowers who and drop the dime on people like Trump who are engaged in nefarious activities in this great shell game to deceive the American public. And we need to invest in independent sources of media to increase a more robust democratic engagement with our system. And I think in those ways, by ensuring a stronger educational system, incentivizing engagement with the sciences, increasing equal opportunities by making education free, as well as dealing with the democratic deficit, we can ensure in future that situations like this don't happen. But for the immediate period, what we need to do is to tackle these inequalities we face right here and now. And we need to ensure that if we're talking about bailouts and about what economically matters, that we're focused on what economically matters to Americans. We have the resources. We've used them incorrectly. We need to use them to help Americans fight this epidemic.
Okay, thank you, Dario. I have a question for the both of you as well. I'm Ron Gav. You guys can't see me. I'm Ron Gavlik. I'm the media coordinator for the Allegheny Greens. My question is, we are beginning to form a committee to explore creating a Green New Deal locally. And this is a way to address these important issues instead of waiting for state and federal government to do something about it. What kind of advice can you give us in our pursuit of a local Green New Deal? Howie, could you start?
Sure. First thing I would say is get your engineers, architects, scientists, activists together and sketch out a plan. It depends on what you got locally in terms of public institutions committed to it. Do you have a municipal power utility? You absolutely need that to go to clean energy because the IOUs, the investor-owned utilities, do not want to move. They have servo-mechanical grids with centralized power plants. They want to wear them out before they build a digital smart grid that can accommodate distributed solar and wind power generation. So you need to take over your utility and then plan the transition, the rapid transition to 100% clean energy through that agency, which has revenues. And you can make the right investments. And you don't have to pay stockholders. Municipal public power systems provide the power at about 15% less than the IOUs. So you got a 15% margin there to work with to do that plan. And you got to plan the transportation. Every damn city in this country had a light rail trolley system between the 1890s and the 1930s. And you may know about the conspiracy where, rubber companies and auto companies and oil companies got together and bought these systems out in the Depression when they were hurting and then scrapped them and then hit up the public sector to build roads and pay for their buses with what little public transportation was left. So I think that's another area where you can do a lot of planning. In terms of your buildings, getting off natural gas or heating oil, depending on where you are, to heat and cool and cook and those things in your buildings, heat pumps, retrofitting buildings with heat pumps is a huge thing we need to do. And you got to have a way of financing it because the average person can't afford to pay up front. So your power utility could be the financer of that, or a municipal bank. So set up a public bank and they could do the financing, or they could do it in combination. But I think you need a committee first to do some research and then organize campaigns and start hitting those objectives. And you need to get Greens into your city council because everywhere I've been, and I can tell you about Syracuse, I ran for mayor in 2005, and I called for public power. And we have a village next to Syracuse where the electric power was 1/4 what we were paying National Grid, as we call it, National Grid, for power. And so I kept pointing that out. This was a time when power and gas, and that was a time when gas prices were high and people were getting, shellacked. So that became very popular, and we were able to get a movement where we even got the city council to authorize funds for a feasibility study for public power. And then the damn Democratic mayor, who now is a lackey of Cuomo at the state level on this stuff, took that and told the vendor no, I want Siemens to come in and do a biofuels plant and only send the power to the schools and the government buildings. So the city council pulled the funding. So that's why we got to clean house and get our people into government. So, there's a whole lot that can be done. But the first thing is you need to have a basic outline that you can take to the public and give them a vision. And then you can mobilize around that. And then I think the economic relationship is important because, every time as environmentalists we come out, business comes back and says it's jobs versus the environment. And of course, we got the numbers and all the facts showing that environment is jobs. And we got to make that case with the public too. And if we can do that, I think we can get them behind us. And going to the labor movement is important. The building trades are tough. I used to be a carpenter. I fought with them over this stuff going back to the 70s when we had the clamshell labor committee. They're going to be tough. The rank and file will understand. It's the business agents and the officers who are more interested in the bird in the hands where two in the bush. They just want to go with the contracts they got, with the industries they got. And they're really more like small businesses than labor unions. So they're going to be the toughest group, but you can work on the rank and file. So those are some thoughts off the top of my head.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Dario, do you have any thoughts on a local Green New Deal?
Absolutely. The first thing that comes to mind as someone who's been active in local organization in Youngstown is this is one of those moments where you cash in your so-called political chips. This is a moment where you take stock of the engagements you have hopefully already made with community organizations, with various sectors of leadership in your community, and coalesce around this central plan that people are engaged in and everyone has a piece in building. And so you want to start this process with listening. You want to talk to people first, connect with the community organizations that have deep insight into what's going on into their neighborhoods and get a sense of where their needs lie first and foremost. And you want to connect with those organizations that are fellow travelers in the same common cause, the same kind of environmental and community organizational causes. You want to speak, of course, to the local experience, and that's the great thing about local Green New Deals. And I'm in Los Angeles right now, presently. There is a municipal Green New Deal that was advanced here by Mayor Garcetti. Now, of course, I'm not saying that to endorse its content. I'm pointing out the fact that this is a thing that has been proposed and occurred in a number of municipalities. And you will find opportunities to possibly engage in multi-partisan efforts to create something that could be a win-win for everyone, because at the end of the day, people want to seem responsive to their voters, if only, in the case of some more cynical parties, to ensure that they have their votes. And as a party that aims for national leadership and would have to engage in multi-partisan efforts, this is a good grounds to get a sense, a grounding in how that actually works. You'll have to connect with different people on different levels to make this happen. And when I say it has to be responsive to the local experience, take, for example, again, Youngstown. Youngstown has a serious fracking issue. The earthquakes created by fracking are a serious environmental issue in that area. And so as someone who's been an anti-fracking activist myself, you'd want to make that a part of the Green New Deal, the issue of banning fracking. You want to make sure that you cover the environmental crisis and the actual experiences of the people in the area that you're representing, and that you deal with the Green New Deal's promise of jobs in a way that's responsive to that. Because, for instance, they've been told in Youngstown, you need to support fracking, otherwise you will lose jobs. And that needs to be debunked with a plan that addresses those kinds of scaremongering. And of course, you don't want to ignore the demographics, both racial and socioeconomic. You want to ensure that everyone is on board in a way that represents their experience. Take transportation, which is a part of the Green New Deal, increasing the opportunities for public transportation. Well, that has definite socioeconomic and racial impacts. On the south side of Youngstown, which is a predominantly African-American neighborhood, the transportation connections are terrible. And your ability to get to a clinic, your ability to get to a supermarket is very limited. And so if we're actually going to put forward a plan that's going to address that aspect of human experience, then you really need to have a wide diversity of people at the table engage in making that happen. So to recap as a whole, What you want to do is, yes, absolutely have a plan, but you first want to gather people together in the best representation of our green values to make sure there's broad representation in making that plan happen, that there's broad community buy-in, and that will increase the ability for that plan to ultimately succeed and have political will behind it.
Okay, fantastic. I just received a note from our chair, Jay Walker, that we have about 10 minutes left because we'd like to close our meeting with any last thoughts among the membership. I would like to give each of you some closing thoughts. If you have any notes prepared. And Dario, if you'd like to continue, I'd like to give Howie the last word after you because we'd like to bring in Darlene for a couple minutes as well, just to let her give us her take on a couple of our local issues.
Absolutely. I'd like to once again thank you for having me and for this opportunity to speak to your membership. You know, this election poses some very important challenges. And even before COVID-19, it posed certain challenges to us. There's a chorus of people saying you have to support whoever the Democratic Party nominees. We have to defeat Trump. And what they're ignoring, as I've alluded to earlier, they're ignoring to the fact that we have a massive Democratic deficit that created that circumstance in the first place. We have to rise to meet the challenge of that chorus of voices. We have to be strong and full-throated in representing the fact that our party and the platform that we offer that speaks to the wide range of Americans' experience is going to help break down this system, this two-party system that keeps us trapped with candidates that don't genuinely represent us, with presidents who don't genuinely represent our future, where our future needs to be as a country. Our campaign, the Hunter Elias campaign, speaks to those challenges we're going to face in 2020, to the hunger, to the need for fresh new voices to come to the forefront, and the broad platform that we need to put forward in addressing the inequalities in this country, not just in the midst of COVID-19, in this crisis, this medical crisis, which we will address with a broad platform of economic assistance and medical assistance to all, but the inequalities that existed before and will persist afterwards. We're a campaign that will be able to speak to the experience of the steelworker that's lost his job at GM Lordstown, to the coal miner that is looking for coal to come back and is getting empty promises from Trump, to the single mother in Youngstown, Ohio, whose child brings home no books because they have no resources in their school. Our campaign speaks to all of those diverse experiences, and that is a campaign this country is hungry for. So I thank you again for the opportunity to address you with our perspective on 2020, and I look forward to your engagement in this race. You can learn more about our campaign at dariohunter.com, and I wish money wasn't involved in politics, but we hope you do choose to donate through our website.
Okay, thank you, Dario. Okay, Howie, I'd appreciate your thoughts and you can offer our membership.
Sure. Just to clean up one point that came up earlier. When I said forbearance and not moratorium on rent, mortgages, and utility bills, I'm not saying the cost should be borne by the average person at home. I'm saying the government should pay the difference between what they can afford and what they cannot now afford because of what the coronavirus has done. So the government would make up the difference. A moratorium would put the burden on landlords and behind them, the banking system. And if we put the burden on them, they're not going to be ready when we come out of this depression. So it's not leaving the people hanging, and it's also not leaving the businesses hanging. It's the government's got to step in and make sure people can make their payments, and the businesses that need those payments can survive until the economy reopens. So just wanted to clear that up. Look, we're in a situation, we got a miserable choice between the major parties. We got a racist incompetent named Donald Trump and a neoliberal hawk named Joe Biden, who seems to have gone into hiding. So anything could happen in this election if we can catch fire. And the goal of my campaign is to catch fire. And I think there's potential. You know, Bernie Sanders didn't win the primaries, but he won the issues. Even the Biden voters are for Medicare for all. The majority of people want a Green New Deal. People want tuition-free higher education. They want student and medical debt relief. These are things that won't be in the campaign without the Green Party. And if we can bring those issues forward, I think we could catch fire and have a major impact on this election and change the debate. And this coronavirus crisis, besides what it's doing to public health, the economy, was already in trouble, and now it's being, really slammed. And people are hurting, and they're going to keep hurting because they don't have a plan to come out without making us sick. They want us to die for the Dow, go back to work. That's Donald Trump. And, we can't do that. So I think we have a real opportunity here. Now, some people, and they're going to come at us, whether it's me or Dario as a nominee, and say, you're spoiling the election. I got an open letter from, these supposedly smart people like Noam Chomsky and Barbara Ehrenreich and Bill Fletcher and Michael Albert saying we should run a safe state strategy. We should only run in those states where it doesn't make any difference. I mean, why the hell should we run if we don't think we make enough difference to count? And what about you in Pennsylvania? What I told him in my response was every state is a battleground. There's no Democrats that I know of in Pennsylvania that's fighting fracking. That's the Green Party. Who's fighting police brutality in Philly, that notorious department there? Well, that DA's done something, but he didn't help Mumia when he had a chance. So he's probably not good enough. And, we've got to run full out in every state. And so I'm going to do that if I'm the nominee. I ain't backing down in any state because every state where Greens are fighting these issues, they're going to want the top of ticket on their side. So when you do your primary, I hope I can get your vote. You want to find out more, it's howiehawkins.us. And thanks for having this program. And really, take care of yourself. Be safe in this coronavirus thing. I know some people that got it. It is no joke. And, so let's just, take care of ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Howie. I really appreciate that. I've asked Darlene to begin her video, and we're going to wait for her for a moment. Oh, I see that she's there now. Great. Darlene, if you could unmute yourself. Excellent. Darlene, if you could just give us your final thoughts.
How's everybody doing? I want to thank you so much for doing this valuable work of the Green Party, especially during this time. And I really hope that everybody's kind of practicing self-care and staying safe. I want to thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak. You really didn't have to do that. But I wanted to come from the point of party building. I have a lot of experience, in my day-to-day life. I don't want to go too much into my history, but I have a similar history to Dario, where I, uprooted myself from poverty, became college educated. I have 3 different college degrees, a master's in social work right now, and I work in family court dealing with civil petitions. And dealing, with issues like custody, family issues, welfare, child welfare, and so forth. And one of the prime themes or current themes that I see everywhere, and it's happening in the United States, all across the United States, is how our current political system is impacting the average person, the average family. And, people right now are very disenchanted with the political system. I'm about systems change. And, one of the things that I've always seen with the Green Party is the value and the potential of the Green Party to bring about systems change. And, I've served in very many different capacities within the Green Party. When I first came into the Green Party, it was in 2011, and I came in looking to champion a cause around the housing issue. And what I did was I worked to prevent the demolition of a housing project that I actually grew up in. And then later on, I still had family living in those projects. And I've been around ever since, and I've participated and served in different roles and capacities within the Green Party, including being a national co-chair. And one of my concerns is, particularly, for example, in 2016, when Jill Stein ran for office, we had this Dem exit that came into the party. We had so many discontent people coming in, Dem exit, Burnocrats, and we were not able to contain these individuals or maintain them and utilize them to grow the party because our party infrastructure is very weak. We may have the best platform that exists in the United States, and this is why I continue to be a Green, but we need to make sure that we're doing everything possible to maintain our party and build our party to be a viable party so that we can be the strongest political influence that exists in the United States. And I think that some of our efforts are very lacking in that area for a variety of reasons. We are very slow when it comes to fundraising. We are very slow when it comes to building and filtering out support to the local state parties and the local chapters. And one of the issues is, as my counterparts here, Howie Hawkins and Dario Hunter, had explained, we need to build the Green Party and we need to get them elected into office. But before we're even able to do that, we need to change the way and the manner that people get voted into office and elected into office in the first place. And, you know, this coronavirus and COVID thing is really exemplifying and highlighting that situation. You know, there's so much corruption that's going on in our political system that we really need to work on changing that so that we can get more progressives, more liberals, and Greens into office, but not only on the national level, but all on the local and the state level. And then again, continue to build capital assets and resources to build our party. One of my concerns has been also is that many people will come into the party and they will use our ballot lines and our resources, and they talk the rhetoric, but then afterwards they don't stay around to build the party. And that needs to be one of our prime focuses, is building our party. You know, with all due respect to some of our predecessors who have been doing this for many, many years, but I think that we need to take this party to another level, and we have to be about change, finally. And what I like about Dario and why I signed on to work with Dario so quickly is that I believe we are that package. We are what the American people want. We exemplify the American public and that struggle and that diversity, you know, and we're Green, and we're very proud about being Green. And so, you know, I could say a lot of things, but I don't want to take up your time. I think that, you know, the Hunter campaign really speaks for itself. We are very approachable. We're very accessible. Please give us a call if you want any of us to talk to you personally and answer further questions, or email us or message us, or even volunteer to be a part of our campaign. But between the both of us, myself and Dario, we have a lot of experience, not only as activists, but also as organizers in the legal front, working within the party, within the Green Party. These are all experiences that we are bringing together, and as a team, I know that we got this. And so I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you, Darlene. I'd like to thank all the candidates for arriving here tonight and giving us their insights. I'd like to invite other members of the General Assembly to now turn their cameras back on if they wish. So Jay Walker would like to finish up a few of our points for the meeting. I'm going to stop recording now, and I'd like to let everybody know that I will be providing this video recording on YouTube for further dissemination in case any of our members have not had a chance to attend tonight. Your friends, your families, your coworkers, please share this with them so they can have their education raised on certain issues.